I think you can see why we're so excited that Intisar has joined us here. And I have to confess, Back to the Future was a movie I went to on a date, and I didn't really pay that much attention to the movie. But no, I will go see it. Our final speaker, Jake Gerson, is going to speak from Court to Table, which is a preview of the food that we will have afterwards. But first, let me say a word about Jake. It's hard for me to believe that Jake has really only been on our faculty for 3 years, since he is an indispensable member of it. He came here from his role as professor at the University of Chicago, and his work here has actually evolved beyond what he had done before, continuing to be a leader in public law and administrative law and torts and constitutional law theory and political science. He also now has explored food law, and he is the director of the Food Law Lab here at the Petrie Flom Center. And Jake Gerson, I hope we have whet your appetites.
So From Court to Table is a story about the law of food. That is how the legal rules structure the food we make, produce, buy, and eat. Jay-Z to my way.
Yeah, you want mine?
Yeah, I do. In 1825, French lawyer and philosopher published a wonderful book. It was a grandiose title. That's that one.
You have to put the dongle in.
I know. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. The book was titled The Physiology of Taste, or more modestly, Meditations on Transcendental Gastronomy. It's good not to take yourself too seriously. In it, he wrote a majestic line. Dis-moi ce que tu manges, je te dirai ce que tu es. Rosetta Stone. Tell me what you eat, and I will tell you what you are. You got it? Not yet. The problem is that in 1825, as is the problem today, we often didn't know what we were eating. And if we do not know what we eat, then we do not know what we are, which means we are always on the verge of an existential crisis. Next slide. Or at least I am always on the verge of an existential crisis, though that may be overdetermined. Slide. So the question today is whether we can use Blackstone, that is to say law, slide, to speak to, I don't know, transcendental gastronomy and existential philosophy. Good. Okay, slide. I love this. You want to sit? Okay. It's the most pretentious introduction to any talk I've ever given, so I apologize. It is not the most pretentious introduction given to a talk at Harvard Law School this week. Okay, this problem of not knowing, is what I call a purity problem. And the law, or the idea of using law to regulate that purity problem is very, very old. It is very, very simple. Make sure you know what you're eating. But it's very, very hard. Just at first cut, it involves weights and measures, regulation of additives, product names, product labels, advertising, counterfeiting. What counts as food, what counts as natural, what counts as organic, and that's just a start. So let's start at the beginning of the alphabet. Because every great talk is one part Sesame Street and one part French philosophy. There's a note that says pause, because Martha may want to talk about Sesame Street, but we'll skip through it. A is for apple. And yeah, we could do Adam and Eve and the garden and forbidden fruit and blah, 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 blah. And that is food law in some sense. It's a ban. But we're on today the purity of the food, not the purity of the eater. So let's try the other apple problem, the Snow White problem. When the evil queen gives Snow White that apple, it looks like a really good apple. But it's not. It's really bad. Yeah, it's sad, I know. And from a legal perspective, this is not a hard problem. It's just intentional adulteration, it's poisoning. It's taking food, introducing a poisonous substance, and rendering it impure and dangerous. The hard part of the Snow White problem is that she can't tell. It's very, very hard to distinguish that good apple from that bad apple. That's the Snow White problem, and it's a very, very general problem. Here are modern analogs. That is counterfeit vodka. It contains a mix of bleach and methanol, which can cause blindness or kill you. It's clear, it's hard to tell. That is pony meat. An investigation earlier this year suggests regular shipments of horse meat from China deemed unfit for human consumption, but that somehow may have ended up in the human food supply chain in the UK. There are allegations that the food is covered with green slime, washed with chemicals, and then somehow ends up in the food supply. That's illegal, but it's hard to detect. Now, what we want to know, I think, is not about the illegality, but about what kind of harm that really is. So yes, there's a health or safety concern, and there's also an economic loss in it. That is, if you're paying $100 a ton for that meat, you feel like you're overpaying. And there's also what we could think of as a yuck factor. That is just gross. Like really, really gross. A is for apple, B is for blueberry. Pomegranate blueberry. Palm Wonderful manufactures a pomegranate blueberry juice. It contains 85% juice and 15% blueberry. C is for Coca-Cola. Coke also produces a pomegranate blueberry beverage. Minute Maid enhanced pomegranate blueberry flavored 100% juice blend of 5 juices. That contains 99% apple juice, 0.3% pomegranate juice, and 2% blueberry juice. So B is for apple. In 2008, Palm sued Coke. They argued the drink's labeling, marketing, name, and advertising misled consumers to believe that Coke's pomegranate blueberry drink, quote, consisted primarily of pomegranate and blueberry juice. What Coke says in reply is that their name and label comply with FDA regulations, which is true, and therefore it cannot be, or ought not be, deemed false or misleading. That issue is before the Supreme Court now. For the moment, let's just note that these harms are different than the counterfeiting, vodka, pony meat harms. They're not really health or safety harms. It's not really that gross. There might be a loss of health benefit, but we'd have to know a lot more about pomegranates and blueberries. There is economic loss or economic harm, but there also seems to be a kind of psychological disconnect between the thing one thinks one is consuming and the thing one is actually consuming. It means something to drink pomegranate blueberry juice, and a hunch is people feel like Coke is messing with that meaning. Okay, so now we have two kinds of purity problems, and there are lots more. We have one where the food being consumed is bad or dangerous, and the other where it's not, but it's different than our social expectations. And we have an open question about the right role of law for solving these problems. But technology might help too. So Six Sensor Labs is a new company, and they have a product that detects gluten. It's a handheld product. It detects it very, very quickly. But in theory, it can detect other allergens like dairy, peanuts, shellfish, pesticides, toxins, sugar, and on and on and on. And we could imagine that that kind of technology can solve the Snow White problem in a way that law really cannot. So ask, can it help solve the B is for apple problem? Or when a company lists evaporated cane juice as an ingredient instead of sugar? Or when a consumer claims they were misled because Fruit Loops do not contain fruit? Real cases. It's not clear, but the frontier issues in this field are going to be about how law and technology might dovetail to solve these food purity problems. And for those of you keeping track, that's Black-Schoen starch, Snow White, Briand Sauvin, Adam and Eve, the Mafia, Fruit Loops, gluten, and in 8 minutes. How do you like them apples, Jay-Z?